So I'm Myron and I'm a dentist from London. And in 2005, a good friend of mine came and told me about some amazing, miraculous experiences he'd had with a spiritual master, Paramahamsa Vishwananda. And he was telling me about how it changed his life and so dramatically, and so many amazing jaw-dropping experiences. And it made me think, and I was kind of curious as to were these experiences actually genuine and real? Were they true? I was concerned because he was my friend. I was worried about him. So on his invitation, I decided to go to Germany and actually meet Paramahamsa Vishwananda. This was back in 2005 for the first time. And I was lucky enough because there wasn't that many people around, and I had an interview with Guruji. And in that interview, my aim was to try and work out whether he was a real spiritual master. So for me, this wasn't an interview about where I humbly submit to hearing his wisdom. It was more an interrogation by me on him to work out if he was the real deal. So I started firing lots of questions, philosophical questions, intellectual questions, and Guruji all the time, he wasn't answering them. He was just smiling, he was laughing, he was firing the questions back at me, he was dodging the questions. And as the interview went on and on, I started to get more frustrated, even angry in some way, and he just kept laughing and smiling. If you see the pictures, he has a beautiful smile, and he just kept smiling at me. And then eventually, after about 15 minutes of this kind of interrogation, he just looked at me and said, "Do you meditate?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I sort of, yeah." And he said, "Do you want to do a meditation now?" And so I said, "Okay." I didn't know where this was going. So he said, "Close your eyes, go, meditate." So I closed my eyes, and kind of meditating at the best of times is pretty difficult, but to meditate when you know a stranger is looking directly at you while you're meditating, you're alone in this room, it's pretty intense. And so all the time I just kept thinking, is he still looking at me? Is he left the room? Maybe there's some angels or something that have come in this room or something like that. All these thoughts are going through my mind. And then at the end of it, he said, "So how was that?" And I said, "I think it was pretty good." And then he looked at me and said, "It was terrible." And then he just kind of smiled and laughed. He said, "You have to meditate 8 hours a day." And I was like, another thing that didn't make any sense, totally impractical. And I left the interview just feeling tired and frustrated. And I spent the rest of the next couple of days observing him. He was free, he was full of fun, full of life. But my mind was wanting to know, does he know the answers to my questions? And by the end of these 3 days, I kind of worked out, he's not for me. This Paramahamsa Vishwananda, he's not for me. And so I said upon the people I was traveling with, I said, as I was leaving the ashram in Germany, I said, "I am never, ever coming here again." Emphatic statement, emphatic declaration. And then 2 weeks later, I was back there again. And the strange thing that happened in those 2 weeks was that the turbulence of my mind had calmed down. And there, in my heart, you can say, there was this kind of overwhelming sense of familiarity. I thought about him, and I realized I actually knew him. And this was an overwhelming feeling, and it just compelled me to come back, even though rationally I hadn't really got anything out of the experience, or so I thought. I felt compelled to come back. So I came back for a second time. Again, that same game of asking questions, observing him not really responding to me. It happened again. I went back home. I found myself back again for the third time. And I looked around and I just seriously asked myself a question. Why am I here? Is there a reason why I'm here? What's going on? And so I asked Guruji directly. I said, "Are you my guru?" And he just looked at me and he said, "You know I'm your guru." And then that hit me, because I realized I did know he was my guru. I did know that my path was with him. I knew it from the very, very beginning. But because I was so intellectually driven, so rationally driven, I found it terrifying to trust my feelings. I found it terrifying to trust what my heart was saying. But then I realized that I have to make this step. And so I started to think along those lines. And then eventually there was a darshan, which is where Guruji gives blessings to people. And in those days, now he's doing online darshan, but in those days, he was doing the public darshan. And there were maybe 500, 600 people who had gathered in Germany to receive his blessings. And those of you know who've been through a darshan experience, he sits in a chair and he's bombarded with people. And I remember sitting there watching this experience thinking, do you know what? He spent so much time with me. The least I could do is just do what he told me to do, which is meditate. So I just found a quiet spot right at the back of the hall, somewhere where no one could see me. And then I just started to meditate. Close my eyes, try to calm my mind, try to get more into the heart. And then as I came out of that meditation, somebody came up to me and said, Guruji wants you. He wants to speak to you. And I was like, wow, there's so many people here and he's giving darshan. So I ran and made my way to the front. And then Guruji, amongst all these other people, whispered next to me. And there were hundreds of people around him. And he just whispered next to me and said, okay, so you've decided to meditate. And I was like, whoa, he knows that I'm meditating. I'm somewhere completely far away from him. And he knows that I meditate. And he was like, good, keep going. And he was so happy. And the one thing that I took away from that was, oh my God, he knows what I'm doing. He knows what's going on in my mind. No one else in the whole building knew I was meditating, but yet he, bombarded by all these people, took the time and knew that I was actually starting to embark on my spiritual practice. But more than that was, the thing that made him most happy was not that I'd given him something or that I'd praised him in some way. It was that I simply started to take my spiritual path seriously. That was what made him happy. And I realized he cares about not what I give him, but how far I'm progressing in my own path. That's what makes him happy. And so time went on and I went to Germany a few more times. And I remember one time, a month or so later, I spent an amazing time during the Christmas period. I was with him all the time. It was a very blessed time. But duty calls, I had to go back. I'm a dentist, so I had patients to see. And I felt like I'd been torn away from him in some way. And so I was seeing different patients and all the time thinking about him. And I remember going home to my prayer room thinking, does he still remember me? Because obviously he had so many people around him. Does he even think about me? So I had a picture in front of me and I started to pray to him, if you like, think about him. And then almost straight away after that experience, maybe about half an hour afterwards, I got a call from my brother, and my brother told me, he said, by the way, Guruji was just saying just now, he said, how sweet it was. He said, he looked up, and he said, look, your brother is thinking about me. Your brother is thinking about me. And I just thought, whoa, I'm sitting here in London. I'm sitting here just by myself, in my privacy of my own thoughts, thinking about him, and he's in Germany, thinking about me. And then I realized that time and space doesn't matter for Paramahamsa Vishwananda. If that connection is there, that connection is there beyond this material world. And that I realized then that he is playing the role of a human being, but who he is beyond anything I can possibly imagine. And sometimes people ask me why you follow Paramahamsa Vishwananda, and I always say the same thing. I say, when you think about him, and then you go and see him or hear about him, and you talk to him, and he answers your prayers, you know that he's omniscient. When you have a dream, for instance, as I've had many times, and you go and see him, and then he carries on that dream, and he talks to you about that dream, you know that he's a master of consciousness. When he says something, he makes no sense at the time, and then suddenly life events start orchestrating, and then what he said then makes perfect sense. You know that he's master of past, present, and future. When you're full of pride, and then he kind of cuts you down, you know that he doesn't care about what you think about him. He doesn't care about your praises of him. He only cares about you being sincere and humble. And then when you experience something with him in his presence that the world cannot compare to, you know that you've met divinity. And so I understand why people don't believe in God. I understand why I get all the reasoning behind it, because if it wasn't for Paramahamsa Vishwananda, I would be a devoted atheist. But because of Paramahamsa Vishwananda, I know God exists. And the reason is because the presence of God shines through him. The glory of God shines through him. And this is why I do what I do. So it's only because of a tsunami of experiences over 15 years with Paramahamsa Vishwananda. That's the reason why I cannot deny that God exists. But the real reason why I follow Guruji is actually so deep and so profound that I probably can't find the words to articulate it. But if I were to have a go, it would simply be this, that I realise that I belong to him. I realise that I belong to God. And it's that same sense of belonging I had right at the beginning when I first met Guruji. And it's that state, that sentiment deep inside of me that's come to define my life.